Welcome to Playing Above the Line, where we interview entrepreneurs, business owners, and community activists to get their thoughts and perspectives on leadership. Playing Above the Line is sponsored by Aviso Group, a business consulting and accounting firm focused on preparing clients for the future through innovation and positive growth. Welcome to Playing Above the Line. I'm Alan, your host, and I'm excited about today's episode. I've known our guest not real well, but he and I have been acquaintances for several years now. Actually, we got to know each other in an old watering hole in Bruton called Oaks Cafe that's no longer in business, but he and I would have conversations at the bar there some, and so I've enjoyed getting to know him over the years. Our guest is Harry Cecil, and currently he is with Alabama Technology Network, where he is in charge of industrial relations and business development for Southwest Alabama. So, Harry, thanks for joining us.
Pleasure is entirely mine, Alan.
Let's just get this out of the way first, because I know that I've heard you say several times that when people hear Alabama Technology Network, they immediately think that you're a computer company, right? Or something like that. I know that's not the case. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about Alabama Technology Network, what it is, and then what your role is with that organization?
I'd be happy to do so. And you're absolutely right. When you hear the name of our organization, Alabama Technology Network, the first thing you do think about is wireless or cloud storage or something along those lines. And you certainly don't think about it being an Alabama state agency, but we certainly are. We are the Alabama affiliate of a program that the U.S. Commerce Department launched a little over 31 years ago. And back when this idea was being created, the thought was, gee whiz, American manufacturing is really struggling to compete globally. Perhaps one piece of the solution would be to provide to American manufacturers high-end engineering, technical support training, and on and on and on at a reduced cost. So that program is known as the Manufacturing Extension Partnership, or just MEP for short. So just like every state has, for example, an agriculture extension, every state has an MEP. And in fact, there's actually an MEP in Puerto Rico as well. Here in Alabama, we are somewhat boastful that out of all of the MEPs in the country, we rank in the top 5. My role, and what my role has been for the past 21 plus years, has been a good way of characterizing it would be the diagnostic and prescriptive guy. In other words, I'll visit with a company. Typically, it's going to be a company that has no idea that there is a state agency known as the Alabama Technology Network, and sort of let them know that this is a resource available to them and ask them the kind of questions that hopefully will result in identifying maybe 1, 2, or more areas of support that if they had the funding, if funding wasn't an issue, it would be something that they would pursue that would hopefully result in improving their business. So then what I do is I go to our staff, which is a staff of 56 last count of very talented subject matter experts that are on our staff. And by the way, they're not consultants. We're unique in that we are able to attract professionals with different skill sets from private industry. Mm-hmm. And now they're on staff. And so once again, I'll look to find a match between what that company might be interested in or might find a way of supporting and improving their business, match that with the subject matter expert. We do some introductions and it kind of goes from there.
Gotcha. Well, that's great. And I have to believe that, especially since we're located in South Alabama, Southwest Alabama, a lot of rural areas and whatnot. So you guys provide really something that a lot of businesses, especially in this part of the country, would not otherwise have access to. So I think that's a very noble cause and a great need that you guys are filling for sure.
Well, we like to think so. Our financial model at the Alabama Technology Network is a blend of state and federal tax dollars. And so 60%, maybe a little higher than that, of our budget is offset by those state and federal tax dollars. The point is that all existing industry, and I talked about manufacturing, but we do a lot in non-manufacturing. The way that I feel comfortable putting it is that you're already paying for 60% of the cost of our services. So why not see if there's a match? It's just federal tax dollars at work.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me ask you this. When I was looking at your bio, I was interested because you received your undergraduate degree in leadership development from Bellevue University. And so since Playing Above the Line, this podcast really is focused on leadership and entrepreneurship, I think you're going to have a great perspective on some of those issues that we like to talk about. So when I say leader or leadership, what is your definition of leadership or a leader?
Well, gosh, it could vary depending upon who's asking the question and the situation. But my first unedited answer, Alan, would be is that it's a person that, whether it's their informal or informal role, because as you know, there are leaders in both roles.
Right.
They're able to influence, impact, and improve those that look up to them or look to them for advice, counseling, mentoring, instruction, fill in the blank.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a great definition. I want to ask you about something else you put on your primer, and that was, we asked what was the turning point where you kind of led you to become the leader that you are today. And I loved what you said, because you were talking about individuals in your life, whether it was church or your work life, that began to seek you out for input and advice, and you felt an obligation to be able to offer them something that was worthwhile, right? So you didn't want to just be off the hip with your advice or with what you were telling them. And so talk a little bit about that and that obligation that you felt to be able to fill that role that they were seeking.
I really don't believe that in this human experience that it's just an ongoing occurrence, time after time, of just random experience. It's not that. I truly believe that there is a reason for everything. For the most part, we don't know the reasons for everything.
Right.
Just don't believe in random experiences. So kind of keying off of that, when I began to notice that individuals' work life, church life, in the community would approach me for feedback, for advice, etc., I took that as a place that I was put here to occupy. And so, viewed in those terms, I wanted to make sure that I was doing the very best I could to fulfill that role that I had been placed here in this human experience to occupy, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And I tend to agree with you. I don't believe that things just happen. I do think that we are all put where we are for a reason, and that we cross paths with the people that we cross paths with for specific reasons. And we can take advantage of those or not, right? It sounds like that you made the conscious effort or choice to say that since I'm given these opportunities, I'm not going to let them just pass by.
You're absolutely right.
Just kind of dovetailing into what you just talked about, there are people that are placed in our lives to fulfill roles. And I'm a firm believer that everyone should have a mentor or two, and that doesn't have to be a formal relationship. It can be just someone that they trust, that they can go to seek advice and counsel. So who would that be in your life? Can you point to one or two people that have filled that role for you?
Well, there is one, and I mentioned earlier that I've been on the staff of the Alabama Technology Network for 21 plus years. And when you've done something that long, there are people that staff members, co-workers will come and go, but it just so happens that there is a staff member that is also a personal friend that happens to be my boss.
Okay.
I've watched him, observed him handle and navigate, in many instances, some very challenging, very, very challenging situations. And even more than that, just the way that he deals with people. I've just had that kind of close observation of him over so many years that, the old saying is that if two people spend enough time with one another, one will begin to rub off on the other. Well, he certainly did rub off on me. There are so many attributes to his character that are very winning, if that's a way of putting it. I just aspired to emulate. And so over the years, he's been a confidant. He's been a person that I can go to for unvarnished feedback and get up or down opinions on sort of where I am. And so it's been my boss. And I'll even mention his name in case he listens to this podcast. That would be Byron Dunn.
Byron Dunn. Well, I certainly hope that Mr. Dunn listens to this. You need to point him in the right direction. But one of the things that you said about him is that he has mastered calm and clear thinking in the midst of difficult and sometimes highly charged emotional situations. That is not easy to do at all, I don't think.
Nope.
So does he have that general personality where he's pretty even keeled. And because I've never been able to put my finger on it, but you're correct. Some people just have the ability to be able to, no matter what's going on around them, just process the information, not panic, not make the people around them panic, and to make good, clear decisions. And not everybody can do it. So what about him? Do you think is that just part of his personality, you think?
Well, it is, and I don't want to paint him as being perfect in every situation. I've personally observed him make some pretty big ones.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But he recovers quickly.
Right.
And he's very, very good at quickly doing the post-mortem of those kind of situations, saying, here's what I could have done differently. Here's what I didn't understand about the others that were involved in that situation. He quickly recovers. And that kind of goes back into something that I hope that we talk about a little further on, called PDCA, but I'll leave it at that right now.
Right. Well, and that goes to self-awareness, which I think is another huge trait that good leaders have. And yes, we will talk about PDCA in just a minute, because I do have that on my list. It's further on down, but I want to circle back to, while we're talking about Mr. Dunn, who has been able to lead in times of high emotions and whatnot, talk about leading in crisis and change. I mean, that's one of the things that you checked on the show primer that you wanted to focus on. So, and I, again, believe that there are people who do it well and people who don't. So give me your thoughts on effective leaders in times of change and or crisis.
Coming out of 21 years of exposure to continuous improvement, I tend to, and here I go bringing it up again before you had scheduled to do so, plan, do, check, and act.
Mm-hmm.
So no matter how you look at your current state or look at how you're going to contend with what's on the horizon, it's all about getting a plan, going ahead and doing it, checking your results, and then act upon how you're going to look at that new plan. So it is the PDCA, that rapid cycle of improvements. And for me, it has worked well with crisis situations, some that may have some emotions involved. I mean, you have to have a track to run on. Maybe that's sort of that linear thinking that through osmosis, I've sort of picked up from engineers from different disciplines. And so the word on the curb is that engineers are linear thinkers. And that is true for the most part. But the point of it is that you have to pick a place in your planning to start. Preparation is not action. Preparation is preparation. It's the doing. When you read different continuous improvement authors out there, they talk about the doing. I don't want to discount the importance of planning, but after a while, planning is just stalling. It's the doing. And so crisis situations, how to approach them. It's all about, okay, let me just pick something. It makes the most sense. If there are others involved, let's get their input. Let's get some consensus on this. Then let's get the boat away from the dock.
Yeah, I love that. And plan, do, check, act has not been something that's been brought up in those specific terms on the podcast over the past, 2.5 years since we've been doing this. But I love that, because that is absolutely a way to be able to deal with that crisis and change when it comes, to have that plan in place. But I also love what you said. And I think a lot of people use planning as an excuse not to do. They love to say, I'm planning. Well, at some point, like you said, you've got to jump off the cliff and do something about it. So I think that's great. So what advice would you give someone who thinks that they want to either enter the same type field you're in, as far as the lean manufacturing or the helping businesses improve processes and whatnot? I mean, do you have a word of wisdom to give someone who might be wanting to do kind of what you do?
I have one word and one word only. It is passion.
Okay.
But, when you say passion, I mean, you hear it every day, overused. And maybe it sounds a little corny, but without that, you're just going through the motions. You really are just going through the motion. So it's that kind of gripping passion that even when things are going real well, you're thinking about, how do I get better at this? What could I have changed 6 months ago that would make me better today? Now, or however you self-analyze. But if you don't have that, that heavy portion of passion in there, it usually plays itself out. Where you are at without passion, typically is going to play itself out. And we see it every day. I mean, don't we?
Mm-hmm.
We see people that have been in positions for 5, 10, 15 years, and they say, yeah, I hate my job. Right. And I don't know what the silver bullet is for this, Alan, but very often, and I would almost wager to say that for the most part, people are involved in however they contribute to this American economy, they're not in the right place. And I hope I am wrong about that, but boy, I see it a lot. Folks are just not in the right place.
Yeah, well, and one thing you mentioned too, once I read it, it kind of made sense, and I never really thought about it in these terms. But even if you're in the right place and how much you love what you're doing, you're right. If things are going well, I mean, it's easy to get bored. I think you kind of, like you said, put it on autopilot.
Yep.
It doesn't necessarily mean that you don't still have that passion, but maybe you've forgotten it or you've not done the things to reignite it. What do you think then? Even if you're in the right spot, but you feel that boredom creeping in, any ideas on how to combat that or reignite that passion?
Well, this is actually a new level of recognition that I've come through some reading that you and probably all of your audience read years ago, a book called Atomic Habits. And Mike Clear takes you down sort of the path of development and suggests that, okay, so once you find yourself very confident and competent and you know it, and success is almost happening without a lot of effort. So that autopilot, quote unquote, occurs.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very dangerous because 2 days, 2 weeks, 6 months later, you find that you've lost so much ground.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that has happened to me time and time again. I'm going to be a little transparent with you and your audience. And it wasn't until recently, having struggled with that sort of peaks and valleys, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Complacency will rob you.
Yeah.
It will literally take time and progress away from you. So for me, the aha moment was, recognizing through reading Atomic Habits that once you get bored, once you see boredom setting in, that's when you press in. And it could be for persons they've reached their weight loss goal, they're exercisers, weightlifters, they're runners, whatever, and they get to that place of complacency. And man, if you really don't press in there, and I'll get off the soapbox in a moment, if you don't press in there, that's when you can very, very possibly lose ground.
Yeah. Well, and, it goes back to the continuous improvement philosophy, right? If you subscribe to that fully, then really you never should get complacent because you're always trying to improve your situation no matter what it is, whether you're trying to lose weight or whether you're trying to get better at a specific skill or even if it's your job. Am I missing the mark there or do you agree with that?
Oh, you're not missing it at all, but might I remind you and our audience that we're human and sometimes it's difficult.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes all the things that life can offer at any one moment, it takes effort. If it didn't take effort, everyone would be at the top of their game all the time.
Yeah, you're right. And I think the differentiator then would be those who are aware that it could happen and complacency can creep in and whatnot, and those who just are not as self-aware as others. So I think that's a great insight. I appreciate that. So what was your first job? What did you do? What you would consider your first real job?
Oh, my first real job? Grocery store. Yeah. I was a bagger. Yeah.
Bagging groceries. And how old were you when you did that?
Oh, I was 17.
Okay. So tell me, how do you think your leadership philosophy or how you view leadership has changed from the time that you had your first job at 17 to now? I'd be just interested in your take on the evolution of how you see leaders and how you view leadership.
Oh, gosh, night and day back then. And unfortunately, it survives even to this day, that old, worn out, non-productive command and control approach. He's the boss, she's the boss, she said it, you do it, or there are consequences. Now, what I'm seeing really good results in organizations of all sizes across all industries segments is that servant leader approach. How do I help you? Tell me enough about you so I know how to help you without even asking. If you can make that connection, whether you're a formal leader, informal leader, doesn't matter. That's really this whole catchphrase these days known as engagement.
Right.
I run into companies on a daily basis, and it's not unusual to hear a plant manager or a HR manager talk about turnover. And 5 years ago, they thought turnover was because of pay. It might be the last thing that might send an employee out the door, but it's not pay. It's engagement. And folks can sniff out what looks like a smoke screen.
Mm-hmm.
True engagement is what leadership is all about. It truly is, because at the very basic level, now you're finding out how to make a contribution to someone instead of them making a contribution to the organization. Convince a person, any person, that you're looking to make a contribution to their life. In most cases, that reciprocity is going to happen automatically.
Yeah, agreed. And so you mentioned connection, connotates relationships, engagement, all those things we have found extremely important. And every organization has a culture. It may not be a good culture, but every organization has a culture. And the ones that recognize that and shape the culture into what they want it to be, as opposed to letting it happen with really no plan or no idea about what they want that to look like, the ones that do that well are the ones that are successful, typically, I think. So I agree with all that: culture, relationships, engagement, connection, all those things. Very, very important. I appreciate that. So what do you do for fun when you're not out there helping folks become more efficient? And what do you do to blow off steam?
I'm very, very blessed to have a couple of good friends that enjoy sports, whether it's, basketball, football, or rugby, or whatever, and so we just kind of goof off and make small bets to each other. We all owe each other probably several $1 million, but that's kind of one. And carries over to the golf course, which golf, I love that game, but I am so bad. I am so bad at golf. Someday that will be high on the self-improvement list. Is okay, let's really learn to play golf. I have 7 now grandchildren.
Oh, wow.
That I do all I can to see them, watch them grow. And then, of course, it seems like I have a never-ending list of honeydews. And so that takes care of, all 55 hours a week.
Understood. Yeah, I agree with golf. I used to try to play, but I could never play enough to get good. And it was just a frustrating game. And so I kind of gave up. But do you have a bucket list course, or maybe a course that you most enjoy playing, or one that's just on at some point after you retire, you would like to be able to play?
In fact, I do. The Retirement Systems of Alabama own one of the best, probably top 3 golf course trails, as it's known, the Robert Trent Jones golf trails here in the state of Alabama. That's something that I'd like to do more than once. It would take maybe a month, because you don't want to just go to Birmingham just to play golf, right? You want to do a few more things in Birmingham, then play golf. So, that's one thing on the bucket list. But then beyond that, there are some golf courses, and I'll end with this, because I'm sure your listeners are glazing over and they haven't even heard this yet. But there are some golf courses that, back when I had it, I was in a position that occasioned me to travel around the country, primarily to some of the really nice venues. Some of the places like Spyglass in Monterey, and I hear there are great golf courses in South Carolina. And so as many places time and budget will allow is where
I like it. Nothing wrong with that. Well, let me ask you one more question. I'll let you go. So you got your grandbabies. How old's the youngest and how old's the oldest? What age do we have? Age range?
The oldest is just turned 16.
Okay.
Youngest is 2.5.
Wow. So yes, that's quite the range. So the 16-year-old, is getting close to high school graduation and starting that next phase of life. But one piece of advice that you would give all of the grandbabies as they get ready to enter that next phase of life, as they become young adults, what would that one piece of advice that you want all of them to know that granddad gave them, what would that be?
So at the top of this conversation, we talked about that we both believe that there's no such thing as random experience, right? And so It's amazing that you asked me that question, because just yesterday I started pondering, okay, what do I do to really make an impact as granddad? Okay. What's the best way to really make a meaningful impact? So I'm in that right now of trying to figure that out. But I guess I have a passion for it. We talked about passion earlier. So I definitely have a passion for making a real impact, not just every so often they see granddad at the grill and, he serves them a burger. But no, there's something really important that I want to be able to impart. I'm not sure if it's going to be a common thread of a message, whether it's going to be personal to each individual grandchild. But I got to tell you, there is no such thing as happenstance. You asked me a question that just yesterday I really latched onto. So when I come up with that, maybe you'll have me back and I'll tell you what the best way to influence.
Absolutely. I love it.
Future leadership podcast.
Right. Well, those 7 are lucky indeed, because you are giving that much thought and reflection into that, answering what you want to leave them with as they grow older. So, Harry, thank you so much. This has been great. We will link the Alabama Technology Network website down in the show notes. And so if people want to check you guys out and what you do, they can go there. But Harry, thanks. This has been great.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, sir. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. And if you did, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes and Spotify. It definitely helps us in the ratings, and it also makes it easier for other folks to find the podcast. And as always, a big thank you to producer and editor Carrie Wolf. Playing Above the Line is sponsored by Avizo Group. If you want to know more about who we are and what we do, you can visit our website at avizogroup.com. That's AVIZO group.com. You can also check us out on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Thanks for listening.